The door was unlocked. That was the first red flag, and it set something cold moving beneath my ribs. I'd just finished a 6-hour shift doing temp bookkeeping work, the kind of job I took now and then, when bills began to stack higher than I liked to admit. I was tired, hungry, and ready to change into something soft before heating up leftovers. I wasn't ready for what I found. Jolene lay curled beneath my quilt, her hair spread across my pillow, as if this room had always belonged to her. My bathrobe hung off her shoulders. My slippers were beside the nightstand, like she'd placed them there with care. The sight struck me with a quiet, clean kind of shock, like realizing a stranger had memorized your life. I didn't speak. I looked at Ethan. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, as if this were something he had been preparing to defend. He didn't look guilty or unsure. He looked settled. "She needs the room more than you do," he said. "If it's a problem, you can stay at a motel tonight." A motel? My own son telling me to get a motel room in the house his father and I built one paycheck at a time. I didn't look at Jolene again. I didn't tell her to get up or explain herself. I didn't ask Larissa where she was or how long they'd planned this. None of it mattered in that moment. All I felt was the slow, steady tightening in my chest, the same kind that always came before I made a decision I knew I wouldn't turn back from. I walked out without closing the door behind me. The air outside was cool and the sky was losing light when I reached my car. I sat for a long moment, keys in my hand, listening to the quiet of my own breath and the thrum of something rising in me that wasn't anger. It was resolve. I started the engine and pulled away already, knowing exactly who I needed to call and what I needed to do next. And by the time I parked in front of the old municipal building where Tessa worked, the plan had already formed. The call connected on the second ring. "Tessa Knox," came the familiar voice, sharper now, but still grounded. "It's Corinne Slater," I said. "I need an eviction notice." "Tomorrow." She didn't ask who or why. There was a short silence, then a shift in her tone, more personal, more protective. "Is this about the house? It's about someone forgetting who it belongs to. I'll draw up the papers tonight. We hadn't spoken since David's funeral." She'd been his right hand for 20 years, a steady presence who never asked for the spotlight. After he passed, I handled everything myself, raising Ethan, paying off the mortgage, keeping the lights on. I never needed help. Until now. I sat in my car with the windows rolled up, the same driveway I used to shovel every winter, now just another border between me and whatever my son had become. The kitchen lights were on. Someone moved behind the curtains. I didn't try to guess who. I didn't want to know. At 9:17 p.m., Tessa emailed me the documents. I signed every page electronically with hands that didn't shake. By 6 a.m., the notice was printed, posted, and legally binding taped right to the red door I had painted myself last fall. 24 hours to vacate. I stood at the curb and watched Larissa open the door. She stepped out in one of my sweaters, holding her phone and looking confused. Then her face twisted. Ethan followed a few seconds later, his hair, messy shirt wrinkled. He bent to read the paper slowly, like he didn't believe it. Like maybe it was a mistake. I could see the moment it hit him, the moment he understood this wasn't a warning. It was a deadline. He didn't call out to me. He didn't chase me down. He just stood there while Larissa shouted something I couldn't hear. I got in the car, closed the door, and pulled away from the curb. The sound of my turn signal ticking felt steadier than any of their voices had in weeks. I had exactly 1 day to finish what I started. Ethan stormed out the front door the minute I stepped onto the porch. "You're kicking out your own son," he shouted, arms spread like I'd blindsided him. I didn't flinch. "You told me to leave." "I did. Now I'm asking you to do the same." His mouth opened, then closed. Behind him, Larissa hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed. "We didn't mean it like that," she said carefully, trying to coat the moment in soft reason. Jolene stepped out next, eyes rolling. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You're being emotional, Corinne." I looked at her, then back at Ethan. "You have until tomorrow. You're seriously doing this?" he asked, voice cracking now. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just held his gaze. He'd never looked so unfamiliar. They didn't know the house was in my name. After David passed, I kept the deed clean, no add-ons, no shared title. It was the last thing I had left of him that couldn't be altered or overwritten. I never told Ethan. Never thought I'd need to. Now I was glad I had. They yelled behind me as I stepped back down the porch steps. Larissa threw in apologies wrapped in explanations. Jolene kept sneering. Ethan looked like he didn't know which direction to stand in. I didn't say a word. That afternoon, a rusted pickup pulled into the driveway. Larissa's cousin, I think. He wore sunglasses and kept the engine running. I watched from the sidewalk as Larissa carried out a small box of books. Ethan hovered near the steps, not touching anything. Jolene stood on the lawn, arms folded. "She'll cave," she said loud enough for me to hear. "Let her feel powerful for a minute. She'll get over it." I didn't even blink. She didn't know me. None of them really did. They thought the quiet meant I'd given up. But quiet is where I do my best thinking. That night, I left the porch light on, not for them. For the courier I'd scheduled for morning delivery. He'd be dropping off a second notice with details they hadn't seen yet. The envelope arrived just after sunrise, slipped between 2 utility bills and a grocery flyer. I shouldn't have opened it in the driveway, but something about the thick paper and typed label made my stomach tighten. Inside was a residency agreement, 4 pages notarized and bearing my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The dates were wrong. The phrasing wasn't how I wrote. And 3 years ago, I hadn't signed anything more complicated than a PTA form for my neighbor's fundraiser. Yet here, it was a document claiming I had granted Ethan and Larissa indefinite occupancy of the house. I scanned the last line and understood immediately it was their counterattack. I took photos of every page and forwarded them to Tessa. She called before I'd even poured coffee. "This is fraud," she said without soft edges. "Not sloppy either. The notary is real. The backdating is structured." "Someone helped them." "Larissa," I asked. "More likely Jolene. She's old enough to know the tricks." I sat at the kitchen table, breathing slowly. My signature stared back at me, mocking me. Careful, practiced, almost perfect. Almost. "They'll be forced to vacate," Tessa continued. "And now they're opening themselves up to legal action. I'll prepare the response." By noon, I saw them through the dining room window. Jolene and Larissa sat at the table, laughing over takeout as if nothing were wrong. Their confidence hung in the air, thick and smug. Ethan moved around them quietly, not eating, not speaking, folding towels that didn't need folding. When the black sedan pulled into the driveway, neither woman noticed. Not until a man in a gray suit stepped out, walked up the porch, and knocked twice. "Delivery for Ms. Larissa Monroe and Ms. Jolene Carter," he announced. They opened the screen door. He handed each of them a sealed envelope. The change in their expressions was immediate, first confusion, then recognition, then something pale and brittle. Ethan stood behind them, his face unreadable, watching the scene unfold without saying a word. I stayed where I was, letting the silence settle, before stepping toward the hallway, where the next set of documents waited for my signature. The next morning, I drove into town to meet Tessa. We chose the small coffee shop on Maple Street, the one where David and I used to spread out forms and receipts every spring. The place hadn't changed, same chipped tables, same humming refrigerator, same smell of old paper and strong brew. Sitting there felt like stepping backward and forward at the same time. Tessa arrived with a leather folder tucked under her arm. She ordered tea, sat across from me, and slid the folder onto the table. "I pulled their financials," she said. "Everything that touches your property." I opened it. The first page stopped me cold. Larissa and Ethan's joint accounts, she explained. But the refinance from last year, your son's name isn't on it. I blinked at the form. The only signatures were Larissa's and Jolene's, printed neatly beside hers. She co-signed. Tessa continued. And that means this wasn't a family decision. It was maneuvering. It also means eviction is cleaner. She has no rightful claim. He barely has one. I turned the page. The next few sheets listed every utility tied to the house: electric, gas, water, waste, internet. Every single one was still under my name. Tessa pointed at the list. You have leverage. You can shut it all down with a few clicks. I stared at the folder, then at my hands around the warm coffee cup. I don't want to ruin them. You're not ruining them, she said gently. You're reclaiming what was taken. You're setting a boundary they chose to ignore. The words settled in my chest, not comforting, but steadying. I closed the folder and nodded once. She didn't smile or congratulate me. She just squeezed my hand and let me breathe. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. The house was quiet. Ethan and the others kept to the upstairs bedroom they had claimed. I moved through each utility account methodically, scheduling shutoff for 48 hours from midnight. A final line appeared on the screen: service termination scheduled. I closed the laptop. Softly stood and walked to the window, knowing the next step would come before sunrise. He knocked once, then opened the door slowly, like he wasn't sure he had the right to come in. The room was mine again. I'd taken back the sheets, scrubbed the floor, aired out the bitterness. But I hadn't touched the chair in the corner. David's old reading chair, where Ethan used to sit with his knees tucked under him as a boy pretending to read beside his dad. He stood there now, hands in his pockets, eyes red. Larissa said we were protecting the family, he began. I didn't think you'd take it this far. I stayed seated on the edge of the bed. I didn't think you'd hand my bedroom to a stranger. He winced. His voice dropped. I was tired. We had the baby talk. Work's been tight. Jolene needed a place to stay, and it all just happened. He sat on the chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. You let it happen, I said quietly. He looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw my son. Not the husband. Not the man trying to keep up with Larissa. Not the tired adult fumbling between decisions. But the boy I raised. And he looked lost. I didn't know how to stop it. He said barely above a whisper. I remembered that same line once came from David when his sister tried to sell off part of their father's land after he passed. David had let it happen, had folded under pressure. He was kind to a fault, and it had cost him. I'm not trying to punish you, I said after a moment. But I'm not going to disappear just to keep peace in a house I own. He didn't argue. He nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I stood, walked past him and paused by the door. Then start by stepping out of the way. I left him there quiet in a room that was finally mine again and headed for the kitchen where I'd left the locks ready for replacement. Jolene made sure every cabinet, every drawer, every box of linens knew she was leaving. She slammed doors hard enough to rattle the floorboards. She muttered under her breath about ungrateful women and entitled widows, but I didn't respond. I just stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching her fill bags she hadn't unpacked more than a week ago. Larissa cried in the living room, her voice pitched high and panicked. You should be standing up for us, she snapped at Ethan. You're just letting her push us out. But Ethan didn't move. He walked past her without a word, reached into the drawer near the front door, and pulled out the extra set of house keys. When he turned to me, he didn't look angry. He looked empty. He placed them gently in my hand. We'll stay at Kara's for now. I didn't ask how long for now meant. I didn't ask anything at all. When they left, the house exhaled. It was subtle, like a building releasing tension. I waited until dusk before changing the locks. Every door, every window latch. I didn't do it out of fear, I did it to mark the shift. The home was mine again. Later, I stepped into the bedroom and saw the sheets had been replaced. Not mine. A floral set I'd never owned. Probably Jolene's. The scent in the room was unfamiliar, faint and artificial. I didn't hesitate. I stripped the bed, carried everything to the laundry, ran 2 full cycles, then tossed the set into a donation box. I remade the bed with my own linens, clean, familiar, a little worn at the corners. Then I opened the window wide. The air outside was sharp and cool. It drifted in and swept away the last trace of stale perfume and tension that had settled in the walls. I stood there for a long time, letting it move through my skin, through my thoughts. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd lost. I felt like myself. And in the quiet of that moment, I finally heard the knock at the door. The day after they left, the mail came heavy. No bills this time, no legal warnings, just envelopes in thick paper and padded packages with crinkled ribbons. I opened one and found cookies, peanut butter, homemade, slightly crumbled. No note, just a return address from 3 blocks down. The next envelope held a card. "You don't know me," it read, "but I've seen you walk your dog past our yard for years. What you did was brave. Thank you for reminding us we have a choice. I hadn't cried when they left. I hadn't cried when Ethan dropped the keys in my hand, or when I changed the locks myself. But that card made something loosen in me, and I sat down at the kitchen table with both hands around the envelope like it was breakable. By the end of the week, there were 5 more cards and 3 trays of food. One woman even rang the bell. "Corinne." "Right," she asked. "I used to work with you at the clinic years back. Name's Joanne." I nodded, blinking. She smiled, eyes kind but tired. "My daughter moved in last year. Treated me like a maid. I haven't sat on my own couch in 6 months." She left a tin of lemon shortbread and a phone number. That night, I found a community group online, Support for Displaced Parents. Not flashy, just a simple forum with first names and stories. I read until my eyes burned. Stories like mine. Stories worse. Stories still happening. The next evening, I joined a video call. I didn't say much, just listened. But at the end, a woman with silver braids and a quiet voice said, "I saw your story in a comment thread. You gave me the courage to ask for my room back." I didn't know what to say. So I smiled, nodded once, and typed, "Thank you." That night I slept better than I had in months. Not because they were gone, but because I finally knew I wasn't the only one. And when I woke up the next morning, I found Ethan's car in the driveway. He parked at the edge of the driveway just far enough to seem hesitant, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. I opened the door before he knocked. He didn't look up right away, just held out 2 grocery bags, milk coffee, a loaf of rye bread I liked but hadn't bought in months. I stepped aside, let him in without saying a word. We sat in the kitchen. He didn't ask for coffee, didn't pull out a chair. Just leaned against the counter and looked around like he was trying to memorize how things used to be. He stayed for almost an hour. Most of it passed in silence. Then, "She's pregnant." I turned to look at him fully. "She doesn't want you involved," he said, his voice flat. "But I do." There was no request behind the words. No plan. Just the fractured truth of a son, caught between loyalties he didn't know how to hold at the same time. I took a breath. "I won't compete." He nodded, swallowing hard. "But I won't disappear either." We walked to the porch. The sky was pale, the kind of light that comes before rain. We stood shoulder to shoulder but didn't touch. "I messed up," he said quietly. I didn't argue. "You have time to fix it," I said. He looked down at his hands, fingers working against each other like he was trying to smooth out something that wouldn't yield. There was no apology beyond those words. No grand gesture, just a tired man and a mother who used to believe her love would be enough to keep everything together. I didn't step forward. I didn't pull him into a hug. I let the stillness sit between us like a boundary newly drawn, not in anger, but in understanding. When he left, he paused at the bottom of the steps and looked back once, like he was about to say something more. But he didn't. I stood there long after his car disappeared, and when I turned back toward the door, the phone was already ringing. The sunlight stretched across the floorboards in a soft slant, catching on the corners of the rug, like it was reminding me how much had stayed the same. But everything felt different now. I folded the last set of sheets from the dryer, white, crisp, sun-warmed, and smoothed them over the bed. The quilt I liked best was back in its rightful place, not the flashy one Larissa had brought in. The pillows were fluffed, not arranged for show. No one had touched them but me. The room was mine again. The photos on the dresser had shifted back David's smile beneath the glass, the one of Ethan, when he was 10, holding up a fish almost as big as his arm. I kept them where I could see them, but not as anchors, just as reminders. I opened the window, letting the morning air roll in. No voices from the hallway, no Jolene humming as she took over the kitchen, no passive footsteps trying to avoid confrontation. Just quiet, real quiet. I sat at the desk and pulled out an old notebook from the drawer. Its cover was worn, the corners curled, but the pages were clean. I started writing small repairs needed flooring in the hallway, the fence that always leaned. Maybe new paint, maybe a room rental, on my terms. No more giving out space just because someone asked loudly enough. No more compromising because it seemed easier than fighting. I'd learned that quiet wasn't the same as weakness. Not anymore. I paused, tapped the pen once against the page, then kept writing. Numbers, contacts, a timeline. The knock at the door came gently twice, no urgency. A neighbor, maybe. A delivery. I stood, slipped the notebook closed, and walked through the house. My house. Every step felt steady, like each room had fallen back into place. Like each wall finally understood where it stood. And the door I locked behind me as I stepped out, it wasn't about shutting people out. It was about knowing who I would let in next and on what terms. This house was mine, and it would stay that way.